And welcome, everybody. It's Monday and time for the Nooner. I'm Dave LaMont. You can feel all the different ways to follow me right there on the screen, Twitter, Instagram, and you subscribe on YouTube. Every one of those absolutely complimentary, as is this Facebook Live program. My guest is standing by, a man who covers the Miami Dolphins daily for the Finsiders, John Congemi, and we'll talk about the Tua Tagovailoa's debut yesterday and all things Miami Dolphins as they have hit a 4-3 mark that a few people may not have thought they were going to get to. But I thought I'd take a couple of minutes with some babble of my own before I bring John in. And we now are probably at the stage of the NFL where we kind of know who you are. The Green Bay Packers kind of know who they are. If Aaron Rodgers doesn't throw for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, they're in trouble defensively. They got lit up by one guy, Dalvin Cook, yesterday. The Saints continue to win improbably as they somehow beat the Bears yesterday in overtime. Weird things are happening. Cowboys are just as bad as they could possibly be, but how could they be any good with their situation as it is? Philadelphia had just about as bad a day offensively as the Dolphins did and won, as both teams did. Very bizarre. We know the Jets are horrifying. We know that Kansas City and Pittsburgh are rolling along. I'd be a little concerned if I were a Ravens fan right now, although J.K. Dobbins finally came through with a good game for them. But Lamar Jackson's not having the kind of year he had before. We do know that Russell Wilson's done nothing to damage his MVP candidacy. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the NFL, and the fact that we had a quiet COVID weekend. We didn't have to worry about a game being played on Tuesday night or a Monday night doubleheader. Now, those are kind of fun, but they've been out of necessity. So this was a good weekend for the league as far as that goes. Now, in college football, we nearly had, and man, is the committee going to have a problem with this. Clemson nearly lost to Boston College. Trevor Lawrence didn't play. He's not going to play against Notre Dame this weekend. Now, the Irish pretty good team. So if the Tigers can't beat Notre Dame, but then Lawrence comes back and they run out, what happens? Are they in? Do they have to win the ACC championship? You see where I'm going with this? There are potential headaches when you have the guy who everybody says is going to be the number one draft pick if he makes himself available for the draft. How do you judge a team when their best player isn't available and then all of a sudden he's available? Do you say, well, we're back to normal with Clemson and you're like a casino dealer, you do this and show your hands and that's it and everything's okay? Does that, if they do lose to Notre Dame, is that going to count against them? I don't see how it doesn't. You have to treat the COVID like an injury, right? And then you have Ohio State, who everybody already has given a playoff berth to after 2 games. After, Nebraska barely counts anymore, which I can't believe I just said that out loud, but it's true. And then you have Penn State, who's probably good, but no one looks good. Then you have what happened to Michigan, losing a stinker at home, although, again, home advantage this year is gone. How did you watch any of that game? Because I did. How bizarre was it to turn on a game at Michigan and see about 3,000 people there when it's usually over, and I mean always over 100. You had Macho Man Dan Mullen and the Florida Gators getting into it with Missouri after a cheap shot on their Gator quarterback, Kyle Trask, which I imagine the SEC will be handing down suspensions any minute now. And what is this week? Georgia week. So we'll see how many Florida players, probably 2, will not be making the trip to Jacksonville. And I found it kind of funny that Mullen had to come back out and wanted to do all of this. He didn't get his 90,000, by the way. Didn't expect him to. But as I said, he was emotional at the time. Coaches yelling and screaming at each other, people acting like fools. And we'll see what this does to the Florida-Georgia game, if it has any effect at all on that. This is basically Florida's whole season right here. They can't beat Georgia. And it came to me as a toss-up because Georgia, not a great offensive team, but a great defensive team. Florida, although their defense played way better, so many people that weren't available to them. What's their situation going to be? So there's a lot of intrigue with that Florida-Georgia game, even more than normal. But enough of that, because most of South Florida was talking about one guy, a man who's already so popular, John Congemi, that people at La Spada's were wearing Tua's jerseys when I went to go pick up some subs with my wife yesterday. With no tailgating, people have wisely gone there to get their pregame fix in. What did you get out of Tua's debut?
You know, Dave, not a whole lot, I guess, the way the game was played. And it was a tough situation, not only for Tua Tagovailoa, but I would think for the offensive coordinator in Chan Gailey. Yep. This is a guy that spent the off week and most of the game week preparing to attack the Rams defense and be able to stretch the field. And they were given, I guess, a bunch of defensive gifts by a strip sack and a scoop and score and field position and a 1-yard run. And I just don't know if that was the true indication of what we're going to see moving forward for Tua in terms of play calling and him being able to get into a rhythm. I think that anytime you're given that type of lead going into halftime, I believe it was 28-10 at halftime. It was 28-7 for most of the first half in terms of the second quarter. You get into a protection mode, I think, as a quarterback and as a play caller. And I think down the stretch, he made a couple of nice timing throws, one to Isaiah Ford to move the chains and really extinguish most of the Rams' comeback opportunity in the fourth quarter. But it was tough to get a lot of feedback on his play. The ball came out on time when he did throw. He was culprit to a couple of drops. But a couple of times he looked like a rookie, and you think you're going to see that in his first and or second start.
How different do you think? And you brought up a good point because the circumstances may dictate something. I have to believe the game plan for Tua was different than it would have been had Ryan Fitzpatrick been the starter.
I agree with that. I think there was probably a couple of either ors or some check with me's or some things at the line of scrimmage that were still in the game plan, but a lot of that was taken off of the shelf because you felt like you could manage that by play calling and by field position. Tua's a smart quarterback. Tua is not – they didn't draft him 5th overall not to give him the keys to the kingdom and once he gets going to have every ability to get to whatever plays in the playbook at the line of scrimmage, but not all on week one. And especially not all against probably, I would say arguably the best defense that they have gone against in 7 games in the Rams, because you have so many disruptive players, not only up front with Aaron Donald and Brockers and some of those guys, but on the back end. You know, that's one late pass in the flat or to the outside of the numbers from going the other way, and now you've got a ball game. So I think it was managed differently because of the circumstances of the way the Miami defense played.
Well, let's go back because a week ago I had our dear friend Ray Bentley on, and he thought that the Dolphins were making a mistake because Ryan Fitzpatrick had done enough to keep his job. You are obviously, Ray speaks from a distance. You are there. Did you start getting hints that it was going to be Tua time coming any day now or coming soon?
Not at all. I didn't have one emotion in my body that told me it was Tua time. I didn't think that would happen. I didn't think that Ryan Fitzpatrick deserved to have the plug pulled on his season, because now there's really no going back unless there's an injury. It's Tua Tagovailoa for the remainder of the season, and you've got a very good Dolphins football team that's getting better on special teams. They were finally to be able to provide an explosive play. I think the kicking game has been terrific all season long, and that's going to benefit whoever's playing quarterback, because it seems like once you cross the 50, you've got guaranteed points if you can get it to the 40 with the way Sanders has been kicking the football. But I just think Hawk's done an excellent job too. He's 9 punts into the game yesterday, 5 inside the 20-yard line. You're winning the field position battle. So I didn't have a real emotion when I learned about it early last week. I was torn because I felt bad for Ryan Fitzpatrick, him coming out saying this was the second team, one being Buffalo, this being the Dolphins, in his second opportunity to feel like the team was his. He was going to drive wherever this team went, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent. It was going to be him at quarterback. And, you know, everybody knew it was going to get to Tagovailoa, but I thought when COVID kind of disrupted the bye week for the Dolphins, I think it changed Chris Greer, the general manager's interpretation of how long we get to see a really good quarterback who we need to get a good look at on a team that's playing well. I think the worst thing you can do to a rookie quarterback, Dave, is have him go in maybe the way the bye week was originally set up in between the Jets game or before the first time playing the Jets, and your left tackle's out, Devontae Parker's hurt, running backs are hurt, 2 defensive backs are down. You're going to say, okay, Tua, go win the game. Ogba can't play anymore. He's out for the season. So now you've got a broken team. I think the thought process from management, head coach, and all the way down was, let's give Tua an opportunity to play when we're playing our best football. When we have a pretty good team, we have a chance to win every week. Let's evaluate him over 10 games now instead of putting him in a situation where it might not be best suited for his true attributes to come out.
Well, I also think we're seeing an attitude change. And let's go back to your playing days, which aren't that far removed, but rookie quarterbacks were generally, it was supposed to be like children, better heard, better seen and not heard. Just you over there. And I remember Peyton Manning, I think, started as a rookie, and he had a particularly difficult season, but he learned. But you look at Justin Herbert, you look at Joe Burrow, guys that were drafted ahead, not drafted in the first round, Burrow, the first overall pick. They're both playing well. Burrow has thrown for 400 before. Herbert is winning for the most part with the Chargers. The attitude toward rookie quarterbacks has changed considerably in the last few years.
Well, I think it drills down, Dave, all the way to Optimus football, high school football, college football. The way the game is played now, it's solely on the passing game. There's not a whole, you're opening up the run with the pass in a lot of these situations because everybody's in shotgun, everybody's in spread. You're catching and throwing from the quarterback position. It's almost being, playing shortstop or second base. You're getting it and you're dealing with it. And I just think that the way the game is called and the way the game is played, it's a little bit different. And I think you have those expectations as a Herbert or a Burrow or a Tagovailoa at a young age. You're the guy. And not only that, Marino and Elway and Montana and Bradshaw, they were the guys then, but it was more of a team-reliant game. It wasn't solely on the quarterback to make as many plays from the pocket or outside of the pocket with the zone reads and the RPOs and all the things that have come into college and pro football. So I think that these guys have had that pressure, I guess you could say, or, the will to do it on your own for a long time. And it's pressure, but it's different pressure. It's about the passing game, not really the team offensive game. If you run it, great. If not, no big deal. We'll just throw it 60 times. And those guys are used to doing that.
That's what I was going to say. Joe Burrow did it last year. LSU got smart and realized what they had, and they turned him into the guy who looked like – I used to call it some of his plays Montana to Rice because he's hitting the guy in stride just like Montana, and then the receiver would go with the yards after the catch. Herbert comes from an explosive background, an NFL background for Tua at Alabama where you're getting premium coaching, and it's paid off for a lot of guys who are making money now in the league. Maybe not quarterbacks, but he could be the exception. I just think – you brought up a good point, going all the way back to youth football. I think there's now being coached that we're not 3 yards and let's punt and play that way all the time. I've got these guys. I got to use them. And you're in a win now situation almost if you're Brian Flores. Not yet, but close. Why not?
Yeah, I agree. I think you give these guys opportunities to show their ability. And I think the game would have played out different. Now, I'm not so sure the Miami Dolphins would have won the game had they not gotten the defensive scores and the field position and the special team scores. But the way the game was called offensively was for a reason. And had they not gotten those points early, I think you would have seen the offense open up. I think you would have seen more pressure in the pocket. I think you would have seen Tua Tagovailoa scramble. I think you would have seen him hit on the perimeter. And I think you would have seen some explosive shots taken downfield.
Let's talk about the rest of this Dolphins team for a second, because you mentioned they may not have been able to win the game without these plays, but they are managing to win in different ways, which a couple of years ago did not seem possible. What has changed with Brian Flores that maybe other coaches were not able to bring out?
Discipline, attitude, finding the right players, and I think a youthful group that is willing to open up their ears and close their mouth. I think that when you get down to it, the Dolphins out-hit you, they outwork you, and they're not going to beat themselves in terms of penalties. I think they're one of the top, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 teams in the league when it comes to not beating themselves in terms of penalties. They're getting takeaways on defense. They're creating pressure in the pocket, which they haven't done in I don't know how many years. And Dave, when was the last time we haven't talked about the offensive line? It's been a long time. So I think they've fixed a lot of the problems that they had over the, 5 or 6, 7 years going back. And you don't talk about the same issues because Brian Flores and his staff, most importantly, has fixed those problems. And I think that's why they have a chance to beat the teams they should beat and be in games that they're either equal or just slightly below talent-wise. But this roster, you look at last year's roster compared to this year's roster, and it's night and day compared to the talent, compared to the experience, compared to the way they work, and the way they played. Now, saying that, Dave, some of the carryover from the guys they found last year have been terrific. Just look at the running back position. Look at the nickel position and Nick Needham. I mean, no one gave him a chance last year to even maybe make the team. He's an important cog. You go out in free agency, you find Agba and Van Noy and Lawson. You find Ted Karras at center. There's a lot of ingredients on this team. It's a mix of drafting. It's a mix of free agency, getting the right guys, but hanging on to the young guys that will close their mouth, open up their ears, and play the way the head coach wants them to play.
Well, you mentioned personnel decisions. That's haunted. I'm not sure where the extra voice came from. There we go. You mentioned personnel decisions. That has haunted this team in the past. There was the philosophy of, here's some money, let's go spend it. That doesn't always work and hasn't worked here. And some they just plain whiffed on in recent years. But you're right. You mentioned the head coach gets a lot of credit, but the front office is bringing him the proper pieces, and maybe they're not getting enough credit for what appears to be a real resurgence here.
And I think the change on the defensive coordinator side with Josh Boyer, I think Josh, his excitement, his experience, and his willingness to roll the dice when he has the right personnel getting after the opposing quarterback, that's been the biggest change. I think the line play, in my opinion, has been the biggest change with the Miami Dolphins. You get a veteran quarterback that can lead you for 6 weeks and manage you to get to 500 behind an offensive line who at one point was starting 3 rookies. And then on the defensive side, where you were unable to even get close to a quarterback last year, they're in the top 5 in the league in terms of pressures, in terms of quarterback hits, and turnovers. Pressure equals those turnovers. And it's been a great marriage on that side.
So it looks like the AFC East could end up being only a 2-team race. I mean, obviously the Jets are doing, they're having a million problems. And New England's clearly not right. The Cam Newton thing isn't working out very well. They had a lot of players opt out. They're defensively very bland. Let's look at the team that's above the Dolphins in the standings in Buffalo. And although Buffalo did win in week 1, I believe it was, is that the team you think could end up winning the division, or could the Dolphins somehow overtake them?
I think they have to be the front runners, only because they're a game up on the Dolphins in head-to-head already. The Dolphins are in chase mode for the next 9 weeks. And I would think that you'd have to have something happen to the Buffalo team that would get them off the rails. I don't know what the Buffalo schedule looks like, but if Josh Allen were to miss a game or two, or an important defensive player or two, at the linebacking spot, when the Dolphins played them early in the year, they were missing Milano and I believe another linebacker. I can't remember his name right now, but his dad played for the Dolphins. He ended up missing the game. So they had two important defenders out of the lineup. You had a chance in that game to win. I don't know if you're going to get that chance again going up late in the season at Buffalo, regardless of fans, 12,000 fans, no fan, whatever it is, it's going to be tough to win up there. The Dolphins haven't played well up there in the past. Yeah. But if you can find a way to get a game closer, if you can find a way to steal one, now the next 3 weeks for the Dolphins will be very important. They go on the road to Arizona. They have an away game in Denver. They mix in a home game, in between there. So you have to kind of stay on a roll with 2/3 offense, defense, special teams. They have to come up and win 2/3 of those games in that regard to stay in it with these teams because they like to score.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, please, John. Please.
No. I just want to. I think to get closer to Buffalo, you have to have something happen to Buffalo that slows them down or keeps them stagnant. That they don't. They lose a game by a field goal, which they win yesterday against New England.
Well, you mentioned coming up. And some teams the Dolphins have already seen. One of them, Seattle, is their next game, which, however, will be in Buffalo. Then they go to Arizona. Then they have their bye. Then it's the Chargers in Buffalo at San Francisco versus Pittsburgh. That could be the Sunday night game if they flex that.
Yeah.
Then they play Denver out there, New England on a Monday night, and then the last game, January 3rd, will be against the Dolphins in Buffalo, where, we know the weather, what that's going to be like, will be brutal, most likely. So that's what Buffalo has. It seems to be almost an identical. Of course, they're playing identical teams because of the scheduling. So it seems like almost the same schedule, what Miami has to do. But
well, Dave, if they can get San Francisco when San Francisco's healthy, I think that would be advantage to the Dolphins because when we went out there a couple of weeks ago, they were decimated with injuries and it didn't look good at the quarterback spot. So if they can figure that out, that's a tougher team that they'll have to face. And, Pittsburgh is playing arguably the best football in the league or finding ways to keep winning and staying undefeated. So that's going to be a tough game.
Yeah, I think didn't Kittle and Garoppolo both leave Sunday getting nicked up? That's, Garoppolo, the jury is still in a conference, but Kittle, everybody knows about that guy. So that's a critical loss if he's lost for any length of time. What did happen to the Patriots? Why have they gone? I mean, is it just Brady or is there way more to that?
I think there's a little bit more to that, but I think it's draining on an organization when you have arguably one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the position, not wanting to stay in New England where he's been his entire career. I think it's draining probably going back 4 or 5 or 6 years when you've had teammates and you have these conversations in the locker room or going out for a beverage and something to eat during the week when you have a chance going, complaining about the way they're treated or the way things are going. Yeah, I know we're winning, but it just doesn't seem fun anymore. I think that there was probably a lot of those conversations, not only with Tom Brady, but a lot of players that have played in New England and left. I think on the surface, it's always great when you're winning Super Bowls and you're dominant and you don't really have to beat good teams in your division to get there. But I think that had to be draining. And if it was draining on Tom Brady, imagine what a lesser player felt like being maybe going through that whole scenario. So it's just not Tom Brady because they lost a lot of players. I mean, through either opting out or free agency or whatever the case may have been. But the players they lost were talented, quality players that helped them win a lot of games over the last 7 to 10 years.
You're Trevor Lawrence. Do you go ahead and get drafted by the Jets and realize that you're not going to become the next Namath potentially as far as lifestyle, although he's not the same guy as Joe Namath, obviously, or do you say, you know what? I don't want any part of that organization. I'm perfectly happy here in South Carolina, and I am able to play one more year. What do you do?
Well, Dave, there's really I don't know if there's any guarantee if he stays another year that the Jets are going to have a second kick at the can. So I don't know if, it's really a personal decision for Trevor Lawrence. For me and what I know very little of him, being around him, not a whole lot, but being around Dabo, I mean, how much fun is it playing at Clemson and beating everybody every year and playing in a couple big games and if everything kind of gets back to quasi-normal and having fans and being able to go through that his senior season, that might be kind of fun. But, putting $25 to $30 million in your bank account might be fun too with, getting Becton from Louisville as your left tackle and probably playing for a new coach for sure and a new staff. And maybe that's a guy that's coming from college football, or maybe that's a kind of guy that he warms up to. You don't know that scenario. So if it were me and the Jets were there, I would probably roll the dice because I think quarterbacks going back a long time there's only been a couple to avoid train wrecks. And maybe he can do that staying at Clemson, but I'd sure like to take my chances going to pro ball when I'm mentally and physically ready to do it. And maybe he is.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's that risk of injury and the potential of the financial loss is part of it. I'd like to think that there's more to the decision than money, but you have to factor that in because he is in that unique position to command the top dollar. At the beginning, before I brought you on, I brought up the potential nightmare scenario for the committee. If Notre Dame beats Clemson, since Lawrence will not play, that's been announced already. And yet Clemson comes back, he plays, they run it out, win the ACC. Do they still get that one of those precious 4 roses, so to speak, to use a bachelor term, from the committee?
Probably. I mean, when you take a look at college football this year, and you haven't really seen a lot of the Big Ten, so it's hard to, Ohio State's really good. I look at the Big Ten almost like I look at the ACC a little bit. You have the haves, you have the teams that are trying to get there, and then the teams that aren't there yet. Ohio State is a lot better than Penn State, or whatever the score was the other night. It probably could have been worse. I think that Clemson's a lot better than Notre Dame and Miami. Now, without Trevor Lawrence, I don't know. That puts it into question. But I think that they're at least even or slightly above both of those two teams if Trevor Lawrence doesn't play. So I think they would if they stumbled, because I still think Notre Dame has a little question mark, even though they dismantled my Panthers the other day pretty bad and have looked kind of, they've looked good, but they haven't been like a team in the past where you go, they're undoubtedly no flaw. This is a great football team. I would say they're a good football team. I wouldn't say they're a great football team.
You were not the first. Also, last week when Ray was on with Mark Neely, we talked about them a little bit. And he says, if they're the number 3 team or 4 team in the country, this is a weird year for college football. So I don't think he's totally sold on what Brian Kelly has. And everybody loves Ohio State after 2 games since they beat the flotsam that is the disaster that has become Nebraska. They would have a hard time, I think, competing in the Mountain West at this point, never mind the Big Ten. And Penn State, I don't know. It's the SEC is seemingly comes down to this game this weekend, this Florida-Georgia deal. I thought I understood Florida till last week. I think I do understand Georgia. And so you have offense versus defense in Jacksonville. The question is how many Gators are going to be able to physically show up?
Yeah, that's true. That was a bad scene at the end of the half there. And I don't know. Georgia seems to me that they're hit or miss on offense. They're either going to be able to run it and kind of mask what they do in the passing game and just be really good on defense and special teams, or they're going to struggle offensively and you're going to be in a 4-quarter football game. Always emotional against Florida. I think Florida probably the biggest question mark is how are they going to play defensively? Are they going to come out? Because offensively they can throw it around. How are they going to be defensively? Can they get after the running attack of Georgia and make Georgia one-dimensional, make them have to convert a lot of third downs? Because if they do, it's going to be a good football game.
Yeah, and they had a lot of secondary out against Missouri. I think it was 14. Their kicker was gone. If these guys are able to come back, the weird thing about the Gators that I've noticed is that they were great defensively, and they did pick up a little depth with Kyrie Campbell back to play up front. But with some of their regular secondary players, they were terrible. It was odd that they ended up playing better without some of those guys. Now, maybe Missouri came in as a big underdog. Anyway, they're not quite at the level of some of these other teams. But Florida is a very difficult team to figure out, and they're playing for their season. If they can't beat Georgia, that's 2 losses. They're done. And, there's nothing they can do about the national championship picture.
Well, I think, college football this year, obviously it's a different year for teams trying to get consistency when you don't have, some of the major conferences playing games until late in October. So you don't know what you have. I think the SEC and the ACC, you pretty much know what you have there at the top, and teams that are going to, struggling to, fight and battle, but you know what you have. I think it's going to be a couple more weeks until we see what the Big Ten and obviously, the Pac-12 hasn't really had a snap yet, so we'll see what's there. But, it comes down to the usual culprits. I think the Notre Dame and Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State, and you're going to have a couple other teams scratching the surface, but that's what it looks like you're going to have at the end of the year. And one of them may have a ward or two on them, and they're still going to have a chance.
Let's go back to the Dolphins. I'll leave you. I'll ask you this one more question. Is this you mentioned Pittsburgh? Buffalo has beaten Miami, so we'll say for the time being they're a better team. Kansas City, we didn't even talk about them, but they look like they just what play? I don't know. You want to call that play? Yeah, let's just throw it to this guy.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. They got a guy in McCole Hardeman who could probably start for 20 teams in the NFL, and he catches like 3 passes a game, and one of them is usually some 40-yarder for a touchdown. Are the Dolphins a playoff team?
Not right now. I wouldn't say they're a playoff team right now. I think they have a tough 3-week stretch until they get to New York again and the Jet game. Right. I think it's going to tell us a lot if they can take a punch and deliver a punch and kind of hang with Buffalo in terms of being in a game and a half right there. They have a chance because in the AFC, you're looking around and you start counting the teams, and the Dolphins are one of the teams you count more than 50% of the time, which is a situation they would have prayed for at the beginning of the season. So I think they're on the surface, they're right on the cusp of being a playoff team. But Dave, there's a lot of games to be played. And I think the emergence of now making the change at quarterback, that's going to be the biggest adjustment for this football team. How are they going to play in a normal scenario? You're not going to get 28 points. You're not going to get 21 points or 14 points from defense and special teams every week. How is Tua and this offense going to bounce back from a subpar performance in terms of what they were given to do on Sunday against another team on the road in Arizona that can score points, that can tempo you with their offense against the Dolphins defense? How can they slow up the pass rush? And now if Tua has to go out and get 14 in the second half, does this offense have the ability to do that in just his second start?
Well, the interesting thing is there's not going to be a whole lot of video to look at with that scenario in mind that you mentioned because of what happened Sunday. They didn't run their normal offense. And I'm sure there are plays that are great for Tua that aren't Ryan Fitzpatrick plays and vice versa. So they are still a little bit of a mystery when as the Cardinals start looking at that videotape and wondering, okay, great. So we know that they got 14 points that they don't normally get. What do we do about it?
Right. Yeah, there is some guessing game, I would think, going for the Cardinals in facing Tagovailoa because they'd have to go back and figure out what he likes to do when you flush him. Does he always go left? The ball's coming out on time on slants. Is there any way we can maybe get a zone blitz just like Christian Wilkins got that pick in the middle of the field? Can we do different things to combat that run pass option? Can we do different things that he likes to do so we can kind of make that a negative against the Dolphins offense? I just think that there's going to have to be more opportunities for Williams on the outside, for Devontae Parker, for Gesicki, and you can't have the drops that you had in this week's game because it just stalls drives, it just deflates you as an offense, and it just throws you out of rhythm. So I think those are the things you got to work on this week, getting Tua back in a rhythm of, hey, it's a normal situation with down and distance and score. But I think on the receiving end, you really have to pick it up because Fitzpatrick was the beneficiary of throwing those 50-50 balls down the field and having those guys go up and take it away. I think that has to hold true for Tua to have the same type of success.
John, where can people find you talking about the Dolphins with the Finsiders and all that? How can you be found?
Oh, we're always on the Audible. Kim Kemper and I do a podcast every week, so you can watch it on WFOR Channel 4 at 7:30 on Saturdays. You can get it on Dolphins.com. You can get it anywhere you get your normal podcast. So that's where we're at on a weekly basis.
Outstanding. My friend, it's great to talk to you. Good to see you again. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks, Dave. Good to see you and talk with you as well.
Yeah, and I promised my audience I had a former Pitt quarterback who knew the Dolphins intimately. Who the hell else could I have brought on? Nobody I can think of. Nobody.
Hey, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, my friend. John Congemi joining me on the Nooner. That'll do it for today, and we will see you again on Friday with another Nooner. Bye.